Hello BookTube, my name is Elizabeth. Welcome or welcome back to my channel, Book as in Books. I am filming this video on what date are we? Sunday, August 4, 2024. Yes, that's it. August 4. And the reason why I'm saying this is that time is of the essence. It's a relevant information for this particular video. Because I'm going to invite you to vote for something and there's a time limit on that. The time limit is August 11. I suppose, I don't know yet what I'm going to write as the title of my video, but I suppose you've already guessed it, but doesn't matter. I'm nevertheless going to make a long introduction. So a couple of weeks ago, I said time was of the essence. So a couple of weeks ago, the New York Times published a list of 100 best books of the 21st century, according to a bunch of authors. And there was a lot of reaction to that, including reaction from the readers. So then the New York Times published a list of 100 best books of the 21st century, according to readers. And meanwhile, between the two lists were published, Shelly Swearingen, a booktuber on YouTube, you know Shelly, I'm going to leave a link in the description box below. She decided that it would be nice to create our own list. So the 100 best books of the 21st century, according to BookTube. And now we are invited yet again to create a list, a new list, but this one is going to be different. Because of course, what was the reaction in Canada to that list? It was to count the number of Canadian books in the list. Because anytime the US does something, the reaction in Canada is, what about us? Yoo-hoo, we exist, hello! And there were just 5 Canadian books on that list. So now, Jolene from Bookworm Adventure Girl and Lindy from Lindy's Magpie Reads have decided to create to create a list of 100 best books. Yes, 100 best books of the 21st century. Best Canadian books of the 21st century. Gosh, the heat is getting up to my head. Yes, because it's very hot and sweltering in Ottawa right now. It's not as bad now as it was yesterday or the day before, but I had to close the window to make this video. Otherwise, the noise from outside would drown whatever I would say. So it's rather hot while I'm filming. Anyway, we are invited by Jolene and Lindy to create this list of 100 best Canadian books of the 21st century. So I'm going to leave links in the description box below to Jolene and Lindy's video. If I can, I'm going to leave a link to the form itself, the Google form that we can fill. So the criteria is that the book must have been published sometime between the year 2000 and 2004. It can be a book that has been written originally in English, in French, in an Indigenous language. You have to show that the author is Canadian in a way, or that it has been published in Canada. More than it has been published in Canada, that the author is Canadian. That there has to be a strong link with Canada for the book to qualify. So I think if we stick to books published in English in Canada, in French, in Canada again, or Indigenous languages from Canada and published by Canadian presses, we should be just fine. So, and if the author is a Canadian citizen, we should be just fine. These are the criterias. So of course, now I'm going to share with you the 10 votes that I put on my ballot. And by the way, you don't have to be Canadian to vote. The only criteria is that the book is Canadian, that the author is Canadian. You don't have yourself to be Canadian to vote. So that's I think that's the basic rules. So in this video, I'm going to present to you my 10 votes, and you can decide if you agree with me or not. I guess we can talk about whether the books that I chose are good or not. I think they're good. However, I don't know if I'm the best placed person to say these are the best books of the 21st century, because in my mind, somebody who's qualified to have read the best, to say these are the best, it's somebody who has read a lot, like all of them, or several of them, like really a good quantity of them, to say, okay, from all of these hundreds of books, these are the best. And I'm not one of these people who have read hundreds and hundreds of books, Canadian books, published in the 21st century, for 2 reasons. The first reason is that in my reading, I don't necessarily focus on Canadian books. I do read Canadian books, but it's not necessarily a focus of my reading. So on average, maybe 5% or 10% of what I read in a year is a Canadian book. So that's 5 or 10 books a year. That's really not a lot. The second thing is that I don't necessarily read new releases. So that means of these, let's say 10 books, 10 Canadian books that I have read, let's say this year in the past 12 months, maybe just 2 or 3 of those will qualify potentially to be books from the 21st century. And then it doesn't mean that these books are going to be good. So I picked up the last 3 Canadian books that I read. No, it's not the last 3. It's 3 of the last 4 Canadian books that I've read. So these 3. This one, The Plouffe Family. It's awesome. I filmed a video, What a Corker, that I'm going to release rather soon. I'm keeping it in reserve in case I don't have time to film something, and then I can just publish that video. So this one was originally published in 1948, so it doesn't qualify. And then I read this one. This one is the second book in the Chroniques du Plateau. So Chronicles from the Plateau Mont-Royal by Michel Tremblay, and that one was published in 1980, so it doesn't qualify. And then I also read this one, which is not translated in English, and I don't know, I think that Lindy and Jolene would prefer books that have been translated in English, but that's not the reason why I'm not going to vote for it. It's because it's my disappointment of the year, because in my mid-year book freakout tag, this was the answer to which book has disappointed you the most, and it's this one. So not all the books that I read are the best books ever. So that means that my choices are not necessarily the best choices, but I think they are solid choices nevertheless. Because on that list of the New York Times, the original one, there were 5 Canadian books on there, and there's one of them that I've read, which is Life of Pi by Yann Martel, and that book is not on my list because I didn't like it that much. So the 10 books that I'm going to vote for, in my opinion, are better than Life of Pi. So if Life of Pi deserves to be on the list of the New York Times, then I say that these other 10 books also would deserve to be there. So that's my reasoning to say that my vote is valid, even though I'm not the most qualified. So the first video of the 2 announcement videos that I watched was Jolene's video. It just so happened like this in my feed. Jolene's was first and I listened to it first. And before she was finished, I was thinking of a list in my mind. Oh, this one, oh, this one, oh, that one. And even before I started watching Lindy's video, I had a list that was almost complete. I had 9 books. And then there was a bit of a fight for the 10th place, the 10th spot. So I'm going to talk about these books, some that come straight to my mind, some others I had to think a bit more, okay, what else? And I consulted a bit like best books of 21st century, and I was and then that one. So it's a bit there's 3 or 4 books that I somewhat had forgotten, but when I saw the title, so oh yes, that one. And then there was the fight for the last place. So without further ado, the books that I voted for. So one that I thought of immediately was Still Life by Louise Penny. In the New York Times list, there was very, very few genre fiction. I think there was not a single romance. I don't think there was fantasy. I don't think there was science fiction. There might have been a mystery or a thriller, but not much more. So in the case of Canadian literature, I think Louise Penny is the reigning queen of mysteries. She has won several Agatha Christie awards, and her series Armand Gamache, so this one is the first one in the series, has been translated in I don't know how many languages. So Still Life, and I think it was published in 2004. I don't have the dates with me, but I know that I checked before finalizing my list. I checked the publication dates to make sure that they are in the 21st century. So this one was published, I believe, in 2004. Another one that came to mind immediately was The War That Ended Peace by Margaret Macmillan. So the subtitle is The Road to 1914. So Margaret Macmillan is a historian, mainly of World War I. Her most famous book is Paris 1919, but I'm not voting for Paris 1919 because I haven't read it. I should have mentioned it earlier. All the books that I vote for are books that I have read. I'm not voting for a book that I think deserves to be there based on the critics and the reviews that I've read or seen or heard. It's books that I have read. So that's another reason why my my pool of potential candidates is rather limited. But I nevertheless think that these books deserve to be there. So The War That Ended Peace by Margaret Macmillan. And then another one that I sprang to mind very quickly was The Inconvenient Indian by Thomas King. So the subtitle is A Curious Account of Native People in North America. So this is a non-fiction, and it is about the history of how Canada has treated its Indigenous people. And it's not pretty. I think there's a few books on that theme in my list of Canada reckoning with its treatment of Indigenous people, coming to terms with what has happened, and just I don't know, slowly becoming aware of the situation of Indigenous people in the 21st century and how actions of 20th century and 19th century and earlier have all contributed to the current situation, and what must be done, can be done, should be done. So it comes back. I think it's an important aspect of 21st century Canadian literature, is that Indigenous people are taking their place as authors, but also as subjects of novels, of literature, and of nonfiction. So that's a great book, a must-read of, I think, in Canada. Another one that I thought of immediately on the same topic somewhat, and perhaps it benefits from the fact that I've read it just very recently. So this one is Walking on the Land by Farley Mowat. So I talked about it in a recent video. Farley Mowat in the 1940s and in the 1950s made 2 trips to the Arctic Canada, so rather far north, where there's no road. In 1940, he talks of the people of the deer. So that was the title of the first book that he published. And it's about already forgot the name of the Indigenous people, Ihalmut, the Ihalmut people of Canada. And then 10 years later, when he went back, they were dying of starvation, of neglect, of a bunch of things. So that book is extremely moving, and it explains a lot of things. And again, I think it's important that people in the South, that includes me, mainly white people, but also not just white people, just people living in the South, realize the conditions in the North, and that just knowing what exists over there. Let's start with that, and then the rest hopefully will follow. So that one was such a gripping read. I think it should be mandatory reading in Canada, a bit like The Inconvenient Indian. So that one deserves a spot on the list. It was published in 2000, so it makes the cut just barely. It makes the cut. And then another book on about the same topic, not quite the same, but on a similar topic. It is Seven Fallen Feathers by Tanya Talaga. So the subtitle is Racism, Death, and Hard Truths in a Northern Canadian City. So this is, Tanya Talaga is a journalist, and she made an investigation about the death of teenagers in Thunder Bay. So Thunder Bay is a small city in northern Ontario on the shore of Lake Superior, and it is where most of Indigenous teenagers from the north, from northern Ontario, go to high school. I don't know if it's most, but it's a place where there are a lot of teenagers who are there without their parents, because it's the only way they can have superior education. And then superior, I just mean more than primary school, because for most northern communities, they're not big enough to support a high school, so they just have a primary school. And then after that, when the kids turn 12, they have to go to a bigger city to pursue their education. And the conditions are not always easy, and several teenagers died in suspicious ways and the police of Thunder Bay did nothing. They just did not investigate. They decided that it was suicide, that it was accident, that there was nothing to see. It's just another dead Indian, basically. So it's very heartbreaking. But there's a positive consequence to that book, is that some investigations were reopened. The methods of the police were questioned. There were investigations about that too. And so something came out of the reaction to that book. But it's eye-opening, and it's gripping, and it's a worthy read. Okay, so that closes the chapter, I'm going to say, of the books that I thought of that are about Canada's treatment of Indigenous people. We can move on to funnier things, better things, or less serious things. And my next candidate is just a dramatic cut, a dramatic change in tone. The Best Laid Plans by Terry Fallis. So this is fictions. Is it the first fiction on my list? No, it is not. The first one was Louise Penny. So this is fiction. It's a novel, and it's a comedy. It's a political comedy. The author makes fun a little bit of our politicians. And Canada, I think, is famous for its comedians. We have a lot of comedians who are very successful in the United States, for example. And also, it transfers in the writing. There's an award specifically for Canadian humorous writing, which is the Stephen Leacock Award. I'm going to leave a link to a list of winners in the description box below. If you like funny writing, this is yeah, it's hilarious. There's a passage, a very, very famous passage. Oh, I should have thought of it before. So our narrator used to be a political assistant, something like that. He used to work with politicians for the Liberal Party, and he's decided that he has had enough of it, and he wants to go back to his first love, which is to teach English, and in an academic environment, so teaching at university. And so it's basically his last day of work, and he's just going to find his girlfriend, and then they can go home. His girlfriend name is Rachel. So for me, center block is hallowed ground. I'm reluctant to defile its image with tawdry descriptions of infidelity. On the other hand, what happened that night gave me the strength to reject the path of least resistance and get the hell out of that nether world. So I'll recount the story, but out of respect, I'll take care to honor the strictures of parliamentary language. Rachel, my Rachel, was on her knees in front of the opposition House leader. Let's just say that she was rather enthusiastically lobbying his caucus. Stunned and devastated, I turned away to get a better view in the lee of the well-endowed rubber plant. Rachel jumped into her advance work with both hands before moving to what seemed to be his favorite part of the proceedings, oral questions. Eventually, he pulled her up off the floor and onto the desk, where he begged leave to introduce his private member's bill. Clearly, there was unanimous consent as the cut and thrust of debate started immediately. Well, mostly thrust. By the look on her face, the second reading was proceeding satisfactorily with just a few indecipherable heckles thrown in for good measure. The House leader occasionally shouted, "Hear, hear," and slapped her back in support. At one point, she amended her position on his bill, and the debate continued. That's the best funny political writing ever. You have to understand the context, the subtext, but we're all adults. I think we all understand the subtext. And if you know just a little bit about parliamentary language and parliamentary proceeding, this is just brilliant. So this is just a lot of fun, and that was originally self-published. That's another thing. This author was refused, his manuscript was refused because he was an engineer, and he was writing about politics. So the publishers said, well, why would we need an engineer to write about politics? And turns out he's very good about it. So that is hilarious. Just read it. And there's a sequel. I think there are 2 sequels, but the Best Laid Plan. It's hilarious. Next, a book that is sometimes funny, but sometimes very serious. And that is not necessarily the type of book that I read very often. This is a graphic nonfiction, so it's not a novel, graphic nonfiction. So this is by Guy Delisle. The title in English is Jerusalem, Chronicles of the Holy City. So Guy Delisle is somebody who writes graphic novels or graphic nonfiction, and his wife works for, is it Amnesty International or Doctors Without Borders? I forgot. And he accompanies her on various missions, I guess. And that's the reason why he ends up in all sorts of places, such as Jerusalem. And he also has a book on Burma. And he has one in Pyongyang, though for that one, he went there for on a project. Apparently there's a cartoon, like anime industry in Pyongyang. They are trying to have an anime industry in Pyongyang. He went there as a teacher to give anyway, I'm not talking about the book about Pyongyang, so it doesn't matter. So this one in Jerusalem, he talks about living in Jerusalem, and yeah, it was Doctors Without Borders. I just saw it. His wife works for Doctors Without Borders, and they are there to help the Palestinians. So they are not entirely neutral. He's supposed to support the Palestinians and not supposed to support the stores that are run, let's say, by Jewish people. So it's just life in Jerusalem. And I think it's super interesting. It's a very good, it's mostly light-hearted, but then of course there are serious topics underneath. So there are bits that are not easy either. So that's another candidate. Next, a book that you may not have heard of. I've never seen anyone talk about it on BookTube, and that is a book that is originally in French. So the title is Pursur. The title in English is For Sure, and that one is not from Quebec. It is from New Brunswick. So that's the author, France Daigle. And this is a book that is written in fragments. So don't know if you can see, and the fragments are numbered. They have sort of a topic, and they are numbered. And the fragments follow different characters, different places, different stories. It's a very éclaté, so all over the place kind of book. The comparison, the comparison that I've read somewhere is with Life and Owner's Manual by Georges Perec. I'm not going to say it's of the same caliber. There was, I think Perec's work was a little more put together. So this one is a bit more scattered. That's the term. So it's a bit more scattered, but it's nevertheless super fun. Though in English, I don't know how well it translates, because the French that is spoken in there, like in this dialogue, for example, it's not standard French. It's not even standard Canadian French. It's French from New Brunswick, and a particular place in New Brunswick, which is near Moncton, and that is called Chiac. It's an entirely different dialect. So I can understand it. For me, it's not an issue, because Chiac is in fact a head-on collision between English and French. The basis of French, it's like 80%, 90% French, but there's a good 10-20% that is English. And my mother doesn't speak a word of English. I don't know if she would understand Chiac. So in writing, I think she would, but in pronunciation, it would be more difficult to understand. Can I read just a sentence? Can I read just a sentence to give you an idea? Yeah, no, I don't think it would make any difference to you if I read it, because I don't have the accent from there, so you wouldn't. It wouldn't make a difference. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be able to illustrate how it sounds if I just read a sentence here. So I'm not going to do that. So anyway, so that's For Sure. It was a lot of fun to read. It's a big brick, though. It's 730 pages. So, but it's a good one. It's a good one. And next, I think it's the 9th book on my list. It is, again, another novel. This one is by a Québécois author, but it is set in Northern Ontario. It is Il pleut des oiseaux, the title in English, and The Birds Rain Down. It is partly a historical novel about forest fires in the north of Ontario in the 1920s. So this book is set in, if I calculated correctly, in the 1990s. It's not really said, but if I calculated correctly, it's set in the 1990s. The main character in the book is a photographer, and she has a project of taking the photograph of as many survivors of these forest fires as she can. And so she goes in the forest near a lake where she will find, she thinks, one of these survivors, and she hopes that he's going to be able to tell us more about what's happened, because at the same time she's taking notes of what happened. And it's moving, but it's not heartbreaking. There are some scenes that are heartbreaking. So there are flashbacks. So bits of it are set in the 1920s, and these bits are not easy. But the bits in the 1990s, they're kind of fun because this man has decided to live outside of society, and he has been joined by a few other men. So there's a bunch of them. Is it 3 or 4 who are living in shacks without water, without electricity, near a lake. And we get this life in nature and the relations between these people. And then there's another one, there's the photographer who comes, but there's also another person that comes and joins their group and changes the dynamic, and it's fun. So it's not just depressing, it's fun too. So this one is just a moving book, a beautiful book. It's awesome. It really is. And now that leaves just one spot. So that leaves the 10th spot, and I was hesitating. I had 3 books in mind, and they are all similar in a way. So one of them that I was thinking of, there are 3 nonfiction. So one was 7 Days in the Art World by Sarah Thornton. So in this book, the author takes us to different parts, different aspects of the art world. Gallery, an auction house, a museum, an artist workshop, so various places in the art world that are, and shows us a bit the behind the scenes. And that was a super enjoyable read. And then there's Ross King, one of my favorite authors. He writes about art. So this one is Michelangelo and the Pope's Ceiling. So in this one, he explains the painting of the Sistine Chapel. So every little frame of it, I'm going to call it a frame, and also the life of Michelangelo, so, and his relation with the Pope. So it makes for a very good read. And the other one was The Cello Suites by Eric Siblin. So Siblin is a radio host on the CBC, and he talks about classical music, and he himself had never played music, and he developed a fascination for Bach's cello suites. If you don't know Bach cello suites, you cannot hear anything in your mind when I say that. On YouTube, just type that cello song, and that's the first thing that comes up. And so in this book, the author just explores the suite. So it's a bit of a triple aspect of it. One is about Bach. Another one's about Pablo Casals, because he is the one who somehow brought up to light these suites. They were known by cellists, but they were not really known by the public. And his recording of it just sold tons of copies, and everybody fell in love with the cello suites with this recording by Pablo Casals. And then the third aspect is himself. He doesn't play cello at all, but he decides to learn how to play the cello to get a better understanding of these cello suites and what they mean. So that was a lot of fun. So by the way, all 3 books would be excellent candidates for a new reading event that is coming up in September, which is Framed in September, which is an art readathon hosted by myself among 5 people. So Lindy is also one of the hosts, with Anna from Hannah's Books, who recommends also this book, 7 Days in the Art World. And another host is Heather Gregg, who happens to recommend this book. And another host is Greg from Another Bibliophile Read, who has not recommended one of these 3 books, but it doesn't mean that he wouldn't like them. So anyway, so between these 3 books, that I wanted to include one of them because you probably noticed that most of my nonfiction was terribly depressing. Good nonfiction does not have to be about a depressing topic. It does not have to be about war or genocide or anything like that. It can be about fun stuff. So I decided to give the last spot to the cello suites, because I think of the three, it's the one that I like the most. Perhaps it's a bit more Canadian than the others, in the sense that a part of it, like the part concerning the author Siblin learning the cello, is very much set in Canada. He goes to a music camp for adults, and I actually went to that camp 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and I played the flute at the time, but I know the place, so there's at least a little bit of it that is set in Canada, so it's a bit more Canadian than the others for that. So I decided to give it, and also he works for the CBC, so he's the author is a voice that a lot of Canadian knows, so that's the reason why he got the spot number 10 on my list. So that's it, that's my list, and I hope you will join us and vote for some books to put on the list of best Canadian books of the 21st century. Now I repeat again, you don't have to be Canadian to vote, and you don't have to vote for 10 books. If you have just one book in mind, you can vote for just one book or just 2 books. You don't have to vote for 10. That's it. So let me know in the comments if you've read any of these 10 books, or well, actually 12 that I mentioned, but the 10 books that I voted for, and let me know what you thought of them, and let me know if, well, I know that I missed some great books because, as I said, I haven't read them all. So I know that I left some great books out, but I hope more people, I hope you will participate and vote for these great books, and that we have a list that is representative of what readers like about Canadian literature. So thank you everyone for watching, and I will see you in the next video. À la prochaine!